So now without further delay, let's begin today's event, sponsored by Neustar and hosted by Collections and Credit Risk. It's my pleasure to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Darren Wagner. Darren, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our seminar, The Latest Trends on Balancing Outbound Dialing Efficiency with TCPA Risk, sponsored by Neustar and Source Media and hosted by Collections and Credit Risk. The following is a result of joint research between Neustar and Collection and Credit Risk. A copy of the slides for this presentation will be available to anyone expressing interest. We have 4 presenters today, and I'll introduce them now in speaking order. Tom Nowaczyk, Senior Manager at Neustar, oversees product management for verification and compliance products. Tom has been at Neustar for 5 years, building products that verify and enhance consumer identity data to mitigate risk and fraud, improve operational efficiencies, and manage compliance. Before joining Neustar, Tom managed marketing analytics at the Rosetta Stone. Tom has an undergraduate degree from the University of Delaware and an MBA from the University of Maryland. Dana Jackson, Executive Director of Research and Data at Source Media, oversees the company's custom and syndicated market research programs for clients in financial services, professional services, and IT. She works across Source Media's B2B publishing and media brands. Dana has more than 15 years of market research experience and an MS degree in marketing analytics from Bentley University. Al Sandoval, Director of Ariema Consulting Group, manages industry roundtables with a focus on collections across many products and geographic markets. He has more than 24 years of management experience in banking, financial services, strategic planning, and risk mitigation. Al has a BS degree in accounting at Dowling College. Mitch Young, Senior Director at Neustar, oversees the company's collections, financial services, call center, and data verticals. Mitch has been at Neustar for 11 years, helping companies leverage real-time identity data and analytic insights to improve operational efficiencies and manage risk and compliance. Before joining Neustar, Mitch was the Senior Director of Risk at Targus Info. Mitch has an undergraduate degree from Penn State and an MBA from New York University. On behalf of Neustar and Collections and Credit Risk, thank you for joining us. If our speakers are ready, I'll now hand it over to Tom.
Oh, thank you. Yes, my name is Tom Nowaczyk. Let me just make sure we're on the right slide. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about just a little bit about who Neustar is. Neustar is a real-time information services and analytics company. We're not a household name, but you probably interact with us on a daily basis and don't even know it. Really what makes us unique is that we're the largest independent provider of caller name in the United States. And really what that does is it gives us access to identity information on consumers, namely their names, addresses, and for this call we're going to be talking a lot about phone numbers. And really we've been around for about 15 years, but we haven't been as relevant in collections until the last few years. What we've really seen is that there's been a shift in the collections industry from one of mass quantities of information or data on consumers to a real shift to getting less data but having the highest quality data. And really that kind of plays into kind of what Neustar does best. Really what we've done over the last 15 years is create one of the largest repositories of high quality phone and identity data in the industry. So to do that, really what Neustar does is we really answer just some simple questions. Fundamentally we answer the question for TCPA is does this phone belong to the consumer who you believe it does? So is this Tom's phone, yes or no? And we do that by doing a few things. One is we have unique authoritative data from the telcos. Our data is updated daily, and then the second thing is we overlay activity insights about that caller. And really the benefit of this dual pronged attack is that we can, one, bring out kind of the most important data on the consumer, the most recent one, and then we can also say, is this consumer using that phone? And that second part really helps with the efficiency that we'll get into later in the call. So, actually, I jumped slides, sorry. So, when we talk about verification, we just wanted to kind of make sure we level set before we kind of move too far. really, when we're kind of thinking about mitigating risk for TCPA, generally what people normally talk about is, one, you need to have consent, and two, you need to understand who owns that phone number. Just because you got consent and then the consent, if the ownership of the phone changes, this is where you get into questions around, is that consent still valid? And so really what Neustar does to understand if that phone is still owned by the intended consumer, what we do is, if you look at this box on the right, you can see, we can say, hey, this is Michael Smith's phone at this address, at this phone number, etc. And really, that's kind of the core of what Neustar does for TCPA. As we start talking, as we go through this, really what this presentation is about, kind of moving forward, kind of going forward from that, and really saying, well, if we know those things, we can mitigate TCPA risk, but how can we also improve our operations? We're all focused on improving our ROI within each of our business units, and one of the unique things we found through our approach is that we can, both mitigate risk while also increasing the efficiency of call centers. The last thing I wanted to chat before I pass this over to Dana to talk a little bit more about kind of the research we did was the FCC did propose some changes about a week and a half ago. So things are changing. Really what, what they stated was they kind of put out a high-level brief of what was that things were changing. There will be a vote on June 18th to better understand for the FCC to vote on these changes. And really, what we've seen is that there's a lot of unknowns. Fundamentally, the statement they made is pretty clear, but how to interpret that, there's we really need the full text of what they're going to provide, of what's getting voted on, and that has not been released yet. So really what we're telling our clients is that things are changing, number one, and then number two, the FCC's focus on quality and making sure that you're actually contacting the right consumer and that you have that consent isn't going to change. Really what sounds like it's going to change is some of the blocking and tackling around that, and then also some of the actual specifics requirements to it. So that's kind of what we're seeing, but we could probably spend a whole hour just on this slide, but we're going to kind of move forward just because we do have a lot of content to cover. And with that, I'm going to pass the control over to Dana from Source Media.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Just waiting for the first slide of the research piece of this. Okay, let's go back to this. All right, so as Darren may have mentioned, Source Media, a publisher of collections and credit risk, partnered with Neustar on a custom study. And we were really looking to really sort of assess what the issues were related to outbound dialing strategy and TCPA risk mitigation, and really looking at sort of the business, the technology, and really the operational issues around all of that, because there are a number of issues in terms of sort of balancing efficiencies with risk mitigation. So just to give you an idea of what we did here, Source Media Research conducted a study in April of this year, an online survey. We had 211 respondents from our CCR subscriber base. These respondents came from various industries. They held at least management, in some cases very high levels of management roles, and they were involved in purchasing decisions for technology solutions for their call center or outbound calling unit or collections. So they have some level of management as well as influence in sort of the purchase of technology solutions. And what we did was, as part of this study, we identified a segment. We ran a segmentation because not everybody's the same, and sort of folks across different industries are facing sort of different priorities, and they have different business models. And we identified this segment we're calling progressives. They're sort of the leading edge in terms of dealing with TCPA risk mitigation, and sort of their strategies for outbound dialing are pretty they're pretty intense in terms of dealing with this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to present the results going forward from what the progressives are telling us. So this segment, they tend to have higher call volumes than other companies. Their outbound dialing is more core to their business, and certainly TCPA risk mitigation is a high priority for them. So we're really just sort of isolating and honing in on what these progressives are doing so that we can kind of sort of learn from who's sort of on the front lines of this and really sort of handling these issues every day. So we're going to talk about the progressives, and so what kind of companies are progressives, or what's included here? Well, 31% of this segment are really the collections and collection agencies. Another 19% are telecoms or utilities companies. We have 16% are retail banks and credit unions. We have some lenders. We have credit card issuers. We have a collections law firm, and then just an other that just sort of didn't fit into any category there. And just to sort of give you a sense of, this is the progressive segment. It's about 68 respondents of the 211. And the folks that didn't make it into this progressive segment, not that they're not progressive, but their models are different. They tend to be manufacturing companies, retail companies, maybe healthcare. We also saw some insurance companies and some commercial banks. So they didn't fall into this group, and you can kind of guess that their models are going to be different. So we're really going to focus on these progressives in sort of going through these slides here and presenting these results. So looking at the metrics that the progressives use to evaluate the success of their outbound dialing division, what are they? These are these. So we asked them to rank a number of different metrics used to that they use for their evaluation. And so this is the percent of respondents who ranked these either in the top 1 or 2. So clearly, 2/3 fully are evaluating their success, based on the dollars collected per dial. So that's sort of very characteristic of this progressive segment. And then, they're also looking at right party contact rate, and then certainly the cost per dial. So these were sort of the top call center KPIs for this progressive segment. All right, and then we had, we encouraged folks to give us their remarks and comments throughout the study, and we had a compliance officer from a mid-sized collections company who put it very well. He said, right party contacts are the key to collecting money. Wrong party contacts only result in increased cost and risk. So couldn't have, we believe that sort of characterizes very well what their goals are there. Okay, and then now looking a little bit more in terms of what these progressives are planning to do. So in the next 12 months, we asked them how likely are they to do the following. So this is the percent of the progressives who are very likely or somewhat likely to, so 52% are likely to increase their investment in TCPA risk mitigation solutions in the next year, all right? And then another 55% of these progressives looking to increase their investments in outbound dialing strategies. So certainly, they are evaluating what those issues are, and certainly looking to make investments in that. Okay? Then the next question is, we're looking to sort of see, what are the benefits that your company is attempting, when they're attempting to improve dialing efficiencies, what are those benefits that you're looking to get? So, again, these are the percent of respondents ranking number 1 or 2. So they're putting these in order. And 65% of these progressives are saying that increased revenue is either 1 or 2 top desired benefit for them. And then next is, increased productivity, and then going down it's regulatory compliance, cost savings, and then headcount reduction is barely anything. So certainly, it is about that revenue and the increased productivity for their calling agents. And then now sort of moving into what that risk means, right? So noncompliance of TCPA, what is that level of risk to you. And so, we're showing here between the moderate and the high risk, they're saying 57% are saying that there's at least a moderate or even high risk to them for non-compliance. And just to kind of put this in perspective, those other two segments that didn't make it into this progressive segment, they had quite a high percent of don't knows. So they're not even sort of aware of that level of risk. Okay? So what are those risks? We asked them to select up to 3 risks. 71% said that fines and legal settlement claims, one of their top 3 risks. Regulatory action, 57% saying that that's definitely one of their top 3 risks. And corporate reputation, 46% citing that as one of their top 3 risks. So certainly these are all top of mind for these respondents. And then our this other respondent, same respondent actually, who quoted earlier, saying that the risk of costly class actions is high. Okay. All right, and then looking at again this in thinking about sort of what their priority is for compliance with TCPA, 81% are saying that compliance is either a moderate or a high priority. So it's certainly top of mind for this segment. And then we asked them to just tell us about what dialing strategy they're currently using right now to help them mitigate TCPA risk. So we have 3 different sort of strategies that we presented to them. 50% of this segment right now exclusively manually dialing mobile phones to mitigate the risk of TCPA. Another 46% are using a mix of manual dialing with auto dialing when there's consumer consent on the mobile phone. And then just only 4% are actually exclusively auto dialing mobile phones. So a little bit low on sort of the efficiency levels here. All right. Then we asked them what their methods are when they're scrubbing and preparing data to mitigate TCPA risk. So they were allowed to sort of select everything that they do. And 49% of this segment are saying that they're identifying phone types and scrubbing prior to auto dialing. And another 38% getting consumer consent to send the auto-dialed pre-recorded messages. 32% sending the files to a service provider to identify the phone types and verify the owner, and then 29% providing consumers with opt-out options. So these are all the different methods that they're using, whether in some combination or in isolation. All right. So then obviously the next question is sort of, there are challenges. Not everything goes, 100% smooth for everyone. So, the top 3 outbound calling challenges, and these were, we gave them a scale of, the very low end, no challenge at all the way up to the highest level challenge. So what I'm presenting to you here is the percent of progressives who are saying that this is a high challenge, the highest end. So 38% saying that increasing profitability for their call center or firm is a top challenge for them. Okay, 35% saying improving right party contact rates is a high challenge for them. And then 28% saying access to accurate and reliable phone owner verification data is a high challenge for them. And then our friendly respondent here, who just happened to say everything the right way, I guess, is saying that the biggest challenge is the status of a phone number can change nearly daily. Okay, so just kind of a recap here and sort of the key takeaways for, again, for this progressive segment who's really facing the, that balancing act of efficiencies versus mitigating TCPA risk. Settlement claims and regulatory actions, certainly top concerns, top of mind for the majority of these respondents. And then TCPA non-compliance is, in their mind, the perception is this is a considerable risk for them. And then roughly half of these firms are really right now manually dialing to comply with regulation. So that's kind of the key takeaway for all of the research. So now I wanted to hand it over to Al. And Al, say hello, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Dana. I would like to begin by discussing a little bit of the market and kind of the sense of overcorrection. To kind of put it into perspective, in 2014, there was 214,000 TCPA complaints submitted to the FCC, out of which 2,336 resulted in TCPA lawsuits. Over 44% of American households are wireless only, with the cell phones as a primary method of communications as consumers continue to embrace all new forms of technology. And again, that just adds to the difficulty in getting that consent piece, and as we bring on new customers and we have the challenges of working with these restrictions with the TCPA guidance. So we did a little research. We used a small sampling of ACG credit card data, and there were well over 30 million delinquent credit card customers per month in 2014. So we looked at the average, and the rates were averaging about 4% right party contract rate, which is imperative that lenders are able to communicate with their customers. And again, that poses difficulties. As it was discussed earlier with some of the data from the survey results, it impacts RPCs, it impacts payments, dollars collected. So these restrictions and challenges are impacting performance. As I move on to the next slide, we're focusing on lenders, and they're focused on putting compliance adherence first. Lenders are investing in embracing the new technologies and methodologies to score the risk confidence of cell phone data to validate ownership. We're seeing this trend increase throughout the industry, and in many of our industry roundtables, it's the forefront of discussion. We talk about the challenges around TCPA and really best practices. This has resulted in the large increases in expense and investment spending and has embedded operational productivity. For example, manual calling, disclosure requirements, segregation with telephone systems, impact on performance, and of course agent productivity. So, and that's really just to name a few. The unintended consequences of restricting dialer use is enormous. Most of the call centers, as you know, are built on the use of predictive dialer systems, and they use those to gain efficiencies, filter calls, to comply with federal, state, and really municipal level regulations, provide MIS controls, and of course reporting for productivity. So there's a lot of concerns around the pieces, not only because it's hard for a lot of companies who are on predictive dialer systems to track some of that KPIs and some of the reporting data and performance data. So that's another challenge by using that manual approach on TCPA consent requirements. So as an industry, we're seeing a lot of concern, especially as mentioned earlier around the lawsuits. And I don't know, Dana, who that compliance officer was, but he had a few good points there as far as what he was saying, and you brought up in the slides. So as an industry, we're seeing a lot of movement towards technology to help enhance and kind of work around the TCPA consent requirements. In addition, the use of IVR and web portals to kind of leverage some of that. But again, to the point is, the question really becomes, have we overcorrected? Are we focusing too much? And again, are we over-compliant in these areas based on the amount of calls that are really being generated? And then when you look at the net number of 2,336 TCPA suits filed, it averages less than 1% of outbound calls. So the question becomes, again, have we overcorrected as an industry? And that being said, I would like to move on to the next slide. And if you bear with me, we're going to bring up the poll question. And what I'd like to do at this time is hand it back over to Darren. And Darren, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Al, and thank you, Dana and Tom. Our question for today, I'll go ahead and read it. How has your company's outbound dialing operations been impacted since implementing TCPA risk mitigation strategies? I'll give everybody a few moments before we turn it over to Jiang with Neustar. Again, how has your company's outbound dialing operations been impacted since implementing TCPA risk mitigation strategies? Okay, Mitch, if you're ready, take it away.
Hi, everybody. This is Mitch Young. I was introduced in the beginning. I've been with Neustar for 11 years, focused on risk and identity applications across financial services and payments. And as Tom mentioned, only more recently in the collection space, as there's been this shift from quantity of phone data to the quality of phone data. And it's been interesting. The answer here in the poll is really our hypothesis and really why we worked with Source Media to do this study, and really something that we find to be a great opportunity for the industry, because what we've seen across the board is that in dealing with TCPA compliance, it has certainly made companies less efficient in their outbound dialing strategies. And what we think is that we think there's now an opportunity for those in compliance and those in operations to actually be friends, because we know there's a natural tension between compliance and efficiencies, and it's hard to do both really well. So let me walk us to this next slide. The keys that we see in driving efficiency is really looking for authoritative data. And this is the whole idea of the shift from the quantity of phone data to quality of phone data. So there's three fundamental things that we find are critical in both meeting TCPA compliance and also the things that give you a tremendous advantage as you manage your outbound dialing efficiency. The first, of course, is pretty basic. It's phone ownership and reassignment. And the reassignment is a critical piece because one of the things that is paramount in continuing to auto dial or continuing to reach right parties is being able to reach the right person. And once we go through this, stay with us. I'm going to walk through a very detailed case study with a lot of numbers around right party contact rates and dollars collected per dial, and I think everyone will find it very enlightening in how we're helping companies balance that tension between compliance and risk, or compliance and efficiency. So phone ownership and reassignment and making sure you have authoritative data that's extremely accurate and extremely current is critical for compliance, and it's also critical for reaching the right party. The second piece, of course, is phone type, and it's being able to understand which phones are mobile, which phones are landline, which ones may be VoIP as they become a potential area of issue, as well as which phone numbers have been ported from one class of phone, landline, to wireless. And the third piece, and this is something that's pretty unique to Neustar, is phone activity. And as we power about 70% of all the caller ID in the U.S., we're able to see when phones are active and when they're inactive. And what we found is that there's a tremendous correlation between right party contact and whether or not phones are actually still active. There's also a tremendous correlation between that and your risk exposure for TCPA. So these three are the pillars that we believe drive both TCPA compliance as well as efficiency in your outbound dialing strategy. And we're going to walk through how these three things can be utilized, and we'll walk through a case study now. So the case study that we're going to walk through is with a collection agency. And we worked through their data, and this is what I'll walk you through. These are the results, but we'll walk you through them in detail, which is that we're able to help this company, and the drive was really compliance. So the interesting thing is that compliance opens up budgets, and companies will do things to satisfy compliance needs that impact the business. And sometimes it's hard for the business to get those budgets, but compliance demands them. And when compliance can impact the business in a positive way, then everybody wins. And that's really what we've seen emerge in this space, is that we entered in through a compliance need, and we found that there was tremendous efficiencies we can drive with quality data. So what we found is that 92% of the revenue that was collected could be collected by only focusing on 55% of the phones that were available, which is tremendous. It's about all of the money and half of your capacity, or half of the phones that are potential to be called. We found that 44% of phones were bad. And bad also means they're very risky, because the bad phones are where all of the fines come from, they're where all of the complaints come from, and they're where all of your exposure is. So the ability to remove these phones to minimize your risk also creates tremendous efficiencies for the company. We were able to increase collection rates by 70 to 150%, and we'll walk through how we did that, and increase right-party contact rates by 60%. So we found this tension that we often see actually benefits both areas of a company if we consider them from a compliance standpoint or from an operations standpoint. So I'm going to jump right into the deep end of the types of data analysis that we look at. And I'm not going to walk you through this in detail. Really, the takeaway that I hope you all get is, let's look at the colors. So what we look at when we do these data analyses around right-party contact and dollars collected per dial is looking at two core aspects of data. We look at verification rates, and we have them in here as tier A, B, and C, and that's looking at whether or not phones are owned by the individual we think they're owned by, right? Have they been reassigned, or do they still belong to the people that we think they belong to? And then we look at activity rates, and we can look at them at a very granular level to say, have phones been active for more than 12 months and it's a very strong phone, or have phones been inactive for a long period of time? And what you can see is that we get very granular in looking at the intersection between activity and verification. And greens are very good, yellows are okay, oranges are not so good, and reds are really bad. So what I'm going to do in the next slide is collapse those down into those colors. So really the takeaway is we do very granular analyses, and then we collapse them into more digestible forms so people can understand what the potential impact is. And I think this is a really interesting slide that we'll spend a little bit of time on, because it's distilling that phone ownership information and that activity information to try to understand how we can minimize the risk of TCPA and also improve your efficiencies. So if we collapse all the greens, we're left with, what we consider to be the best phones. Yellow is better, orange is bad, and red is the worst. So what you'll see in this population is that there was a 2.3% right-party connect rate. Right? And what you can see is that in the best phones, if we look across this row, it's 20% of all the phones in this portfolio. And if you just dial those, the right-party contact rate is 7.5%. And you can see this goes down, as we would expect, where better phones have an average right-party contact rate of 2.3%. Bad phones have a right-party contact of 1.5%. And the worst phones, it's a 0.4% RPC rate. It's 44% of all the phones are the bad phones. So that means you have to dial 250 calls. This is dials per RPC. You have to dial 250 dials to get one right-party contact rate. This is a tremendous amount of TCPA risk exposure, a tremendous amount of opportunity to get FCC complaints, and this is where all the risk lies from a TCPA compliance perspective. The interesting thing is, it's where none of your revenue comes from, right? 92% of the revenue falls within these top buckets, which we can identify as, best, better, even some of the bad phones you may not want to throw out. So it's where the better phones are and phones that are active. And if we focus on this area, or this, little more than half of all the phone numbers, you can really increase RPC rates. You can increase dollars collected per call. You can see the averages of the best phone is $38.46 per best phone dialed versus $2 per dial in the worst category. And this is where the aha moment started to come out for us, where we said, not only can we manage for TCPA, where we can figure out best phones can really stay in the auto dialer. Right? They're ones that we can confirm, they're wireless, they're active, they're still linked to the people you think that they're linked to, and those, no issue in putting them in the auto dialer. Whereas some of these, maybe they go in a mix and these are manually dialed. But this bottom 44%, they're not even worth calling. It's better for a business to put that capacity to work on other portfolios or other projects where they can understand that there's going to be much higher RPC rates and dollars collected per dial. So this is, what we were very excited about as the, somewhat forced shift from quantity of phones to quality of phones kind of emerged in the collections areas of companies. So the next slide is really a collapse of these best, better, and bad buckets to say, let's look at a new dialing strategy. And every company is different in terms of their risk profile, the metrics that they're driving towards, and how they're willing to put a strategy in place. So this is one of many potential strategies that can emerge from the insights that we can provide on ownership and activity. And in this particular strategy, what we could say is a 70% increase in RPC rate, right? If we look at 56% of all the phones that are in the portfolio, right, the RPC rate is 3.89% versus 2.3% on average. You still get to 91.6% of all of your right party contacts, and your dollar collected per dial goes to $19.77. So it's significant increases in all of the metrics that were highly valued in the study that we did. Right, 40% decrease in total numbers of phone dialed, which is a huge reduction in TCPA risk, because as I mentioned, this is where the fines come from, and this is where all of the oversight comes from. So if you can reduce those and just move them out, you get to redeploy 44% of your capacity to more valuable portfolios or projects. And there's a 74% increase in dollars collected per dial. That average goes from $11.36 to $19.77. So on the next slide, that is the case study that I wanted to walk through, and a sample of the types of analyses we do with people to help work with them on what the best strategy might be for them, because it's different for everybody. But what we know is that there are some fundamentals to achieving this kind of success and managing the tension that used to exist between compliance and operations, which is authoritative, accurate data that's updated daily. Absolutely, all of the value is in the data. Being able to verify ownership, reassignments, and phone type are really some of the three critical pieces outside of consent that's available around phone data. And then leveraging activity insights from the phone. What we found is that sometimes you may find people are linked to phones, but that was some time ago, and those phones are no longer active, or maybe they're reassigned, and those are the ones that create a lot of problems for folks from a TCPA perspective, and from reducing right party contact rates. And then all of this insight allows you to prioritize the best phones and cut the bad phones. It really comes down to a pretty simple application around leveraging that insight to prioritize your queue. And we don't get prescriptive around the mix of auto dialing versus manually dialing. I think, as we expected, companies prefer that mix of being able to put as much as they can in the auto dialer, as long as they feel safe from a compliance perspective and they're mitigating their risk. So we find that we work with companies to work through how they can best leverage these insights to come up with a mix of auto-dialed and manually dialed phones so they can reach optimal efficiency and make sure they're managing compliance as best as they can for their organizations. So that really wraps us up for today. We thank you all for attending and for listening, and we hope both the research info and the case study were interesting. We're happy to share some of this info with you in a PDF after the presentation, and now we still have a decent amount of time for questions. So we'd love to hear from folks through the Q&A panel and answer questions as best we can.
Thank you, Mitch. We do have some time for some questions, and several have come into the tools. Our first question is, what will be the impact of the upcoming interpretation changes by the FCC? I'll direct that to Mitch or Tom.
Well, that's a hard one. I'll take it and Tom chime in.
Sure.
It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen. I think with every memo that's written, there's language that's used that seems to create more questions than clarifications. So I think what we keep seeing is that there has been a shift to the quality side that doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon, and that the operational piece that companies will need to deal with is there to stay. Like, I don't think TCPA is going away, and I think we're going to see more incremental changes or modifications, but I think it's going to be incumbent upon everybody to still manage a much more stringent operation where the efficiency of your agents, of how you dial, and the data that you use to fuel it is going to continue to be a key issue for folks.
Yeah, and then Mitch, I would just add to that. I think until the actual memo comes out on the, after the June 18th vote, it's really, I've listened to kind of a lot of webinars and kind of read a lot on this, and it seems like there's consensus that, yeah, some of the high-level bullet points are available, but until the details of actually how the interpretation is written, it's going to be hard for anyone to really kind of give you concrete answers.
Okay, thank you. Our next question: Do you have any information on what the TCPA auto dialer laws apply to VoIP listed numbers?
This is Tom. Yeah, I mean, there's been some there's been a little bit of disagreement in the courts on VoIPs. It'll be interesting what the new regulations kind of look like when it comes to VoIP listed numbers. There's kind of been one interpretation where, if first of all, when we say VoIP, we're talking about voice over internet protocol, and then more specifically, there's different types of VoIP phones. So if you have kind of Comcast cable, that can be working off VoIP technology, but it's going to be an all-you-can-eat VoIP plan. But also Google Voice could also be interpreted as a VoIP technology, and then Google Voice is actually going to work off of your cell phone, so you're going to run into some of the same issues that you have with a mobile phone as you would running a VoIP phone. And so really what we recommend is that you talk to your counsel and get more specific details on that. And really there's just some kind of there's some grayness in the law right now, and hopefully the FCC clarifies that a bit in the upcoming memorandum.
Thank you. How do you work with your clients to help them become more operationally efficient?
So this is Mitch. We work in a consulting basis in terms of structuring an analysis and seeing how Very similar to the case study that we walked through, where we'll understand how a company's works and whether they're using customer-provided phones or skip phones or where they have consent or don't, and understanding their flow. And then it's really overlaying the data that we have on the numbers and coming up with an analysis and strategies of ways that it can be applied. So while it's similar for everyone, it's never the same twice. So it really is a collaboration and usually a data study to understand where there's potential value. We tend to not do consulting or work in engagements to help people. Our value is really in the data assets that we're providing.
Thanks, guys. Next question, how is phone activity defined? Only voice usage, or is text and online usage considered also?
Yeah, I'll take this. So when we talk phone activity, the Neustar kind of thought process on it is we're only actually looking at phone calls. And so really what we're looking at is Mitch kind of, as I talked about and Mitch talked about, so we have access to the caller name. We're the largest provider of caller name, and with that, we're able to see kind of how phones are being used, and more specifically, which phones are making calls. And so with that, we're able to kind of see, which phones are actively being used, and then we can really drive around efficiency with that data. That being said, I think there would be value in understanding if a phone's making text. We currently don't have that service, but I would expect there would be some value there too.
Okay, another question has come in. Are these only cell phones, or does it include both landlines and cell phones?
Well, so this is Tom again. We have the ability to both verify mobile phones and landline phones. A lot of the regulations in TCPA are around mobile phones, but there are some provisions around landlines also. So, but majority of what we spoke today was around mobile phones.
Okay. Our next question. To anyone's knowledge, has there been any TCPA liability on pure manually dialed numbers on phone systems not capable of auto-dialing?
That's a good question. Mitch, do you know the answer to that question?
I don't want to say for sure, but I mean, I think that is the general reaction that we've seen from most, which is to say, if I can manually dial phone numbers, then the TCPA risk is mitigated, right? I don't know if there's been any fines on it, so I don't want to speak categorically, but I don't believe so. So I think that's why a lot of companies have taken the approach, which we saw in the study, which was to say we're going to exclusively manually dial wireless phones, and that's where we see the loss of efficiency in these outbound dialing strategies and for companies. And that's where we see a lot of tension between compliance and operations and a lot of opportunity, because while it certainly mitigates risk, there are some companies, and we work with a lot of large financial institutions, where that strategy is just not possible. The volumes are too large, and to manage the business, it's not really a viable strategy. So for some smaller companies, it may be a viable strategy if they're balancing risk and saying, you know what, we can handle it all manually. But for most, this is the exact problem, that going to a manual strategy is just not practical. And we believe with the data that's available, maybe not necessary either.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how are businesses defining consent and ownership? Can a spouse give consent if the bill is in one spouse's name? Is that enough to declare ownership?
There's actually a lot of open questions on that question. I was reading something today. They were talking about that, the courts have actually interpreted consent 3 different ways. So I think in the upcoming FCC memorandum, there should be a little bit more clarity on consent. I would hope. If not, I think it's going to be up to the courts to really decide that piece.
All right, well, I think that's all the time we have today for questions. I want to remind everyone that slides will be available for those who request to see them. And I want to thank Dana, Al, and Mitch for your time today and for answering some questions. I also be sure to thank everyone who attended today for joining us. On behalf of Neustar, Source Media, and Collections and Credit Risk, we hope you have a great day. Thank you.